There is a growing public and scholarly focus on the problem of economic inequality. Globally, the top 1% of the population owns 50% of the global wealth, and the bottom 70% own only about 3% of that very same wealth. When looking at the level of inequality in the US, it has been growing rapidly as of late. A typical American CEO currently makes about 324 times as much as a typical worker. Although the United States has been getting richer overall, the vast majority of this increase in wealth, over 95%, has gone to the top 1% of wealthiest Americans. Furthermore, a new report by Oxfam revealed that the wealth owned by the 8 richest people on this planet is equivalent to the wealth owned by the poorest 50% of the world. This is staggering. The concern that people express about inequality is also found in controlled laboratory studies. Indeed, when subjects in laboratory studies are asked to divide resources among unrelated individuals, they tend to divide them equally. If a previous situation has led to a pre-existing inequality, people will divide future resources unequally in order to correct or minimize the inequality between others. This bias is so powerful that subjects sometimes prefer equal outcomes in which everyone gets less overall to unequal outcomes where everyone gets more overall. Furthermore, people appear to view the equal distribution of resources as a moral good. They express anger towards those who benefit from unequal distributions. This outrage is sufficiently strong that subjects will pay to punish unequal distributors. One study examining this across 15 diverse cultures found that members of all populations demonstrated some willingness to administer costly third-party punishment for unequal division of resources. Studies of children between the ages of 3 and 8 years old find a similar equality bias. 3-year-olds divide resources equally among third parties, and although they are typically selfish when they themselves are involved in the interaction, even 3-year-olds report that they should share equally. 6-year-olds show an even stronger commitment to equal distribution, insisting on throwing out extra resources rather than allowing them to be unequally distributed between 2 absent third parties. In one study, 6 to 8-year-olds were tasked with distributing erasers to 2 boys who had cleaned up their room. When there was an odd number of erasers, the children insisted to the experimenter that he should throw the extra eraser away straight into the trash rather than formulate an unequal division. It's intriguing to note that they responded this way even if the recipients would never know that one of them received less, suggesting that the children weren't worried about the recipient's feelings, but were opposed to creating the inequality even if none of the recipients knew about it. Additionally, children are just as likely to reject unequal distributions when they reflect generosity as when they reflect selfishness. This suggests that the rejections are specifically an aversion to inequality rather than punishing selfishness. Having said all that, it seems as though the answer to our question of the video is that yes, people do have a strong inclination towards economic equality. However, is it truly that simple? A recent study by Norton and Ariely throws a big spanner in the works. This study shows that people both underestimate the amount of inequality in our society and prefer a more egalitarian society to the one they think they live in. The authors describe their studies as examining the disagreements about the optimal level of wealth inequality and report the finding of a surprising level of consensus. All demographic groups, even those not usually associated with wealth redistribution, such as Republicans and the wealthy, desired a more equal distribution of wealth than the status quo. An article by Ariely in The Atlantic was titled, "Americans Want to Live in a Much More Equal Country, They Just Don't Realize It." These summaries are accurate. Participants in these studies did prefer more equality than the current situation. However, the results also strikingly suggest that they were not particularly worried about large inequalities. Instead, these subjects claim that, in the perfect society, individuals in the top 20% should have more than 3 times as much money as individuals in the bottom 20%. And when they were given a forced choice between equal and unequal distributions of wealth, and told to assume that they would be randomly assigned to be anyone from the richest to the poorest person, over half of the subjects explicitly rejected the option of an equal distribution of wealth preferring inequality. Thus, data suggests that when it comes to real-world distributions of wealth, people have a preference for a certain amount of inequality. This preference for inequality materializes in 16 other countries, across people on both the left and the right of the political spectrum, and in teenagers. As Norton puts it, people exhibit a desire for inequality. Not too equal, but not too unequal. Another follow-up study found that, contrary to appearances, people are not troubled by inequality for its own sake. Indeed, they often prefer unequal distributions, both in laboratory conditions and in the real world itself. So how do both sets of findings about people desiring equality and people also wanting inequality make sense? Well, it appears that what really troubles people about the world is the concept of fairness. People believe the world to be unfair. This brings us to a common misconception. There is a clear misunderstanding on the difference between two key terms: equity and equality. Income equality means that income and resources are accorded to everyone on an equal basis. On the other hand, equity means fairness, requiring that we give people a fair chance to realize their ambitions and improve their well-being under the same laws that apply to everyone else. Effectively, equity posits that the poor be given a fair opportunity to improve their own economic welfare. The reason why the previous researchers all indicated that people prefer equality was because the concept of equality and the concept of fairness were both in line in that specific research. This means that what was equal was also fair in that research. They weren't pitted together in these specific researches. Follow-up experiments have showcased that people chose fairness over equality. For example, in the study in which children had to award erasers to two boys who had cleaned up the room and chose to throw out the extra eraser, both boys were described as having done a good job. But when children were told that one boy did more work than the other, they awarded the extra eraser to the hard worker. In fact, when one recipient has done more work, 6-year-olds believe that he or she should receive more resources, even if equal pay is an option. Likewise, although infants prefer equality in neutral circumstances, they expect an experimenter to distribute rewards preferentially to individuals who have done more work, in order to be fair. The preference for inequality is not restricted to situations where one person has done more work, but it even extends to situations where two individuals, identical in all relevant regards, are differentiated by luck. A study has found that when an individual gets $10 and the other gets nothing, even if it's unequal, it is considered fair. Adults consider it fair to use impartial procedures such as coin flips and lotteries when distributing many different kinds of resources. So even though it's unequal, it's still considered fair. Having said all that, it's clear to see that inequality is considered fair in specific circumstances by the vast majority of people, as seen through the studies that we've went over. As such, luck, effort, and skill can be used to justify inequality in the name of fairness. But what are the psychological reasonings for these findings? Why do people choose fairness over equality? Why do people prefer inequality to a certain degree? Well, the answer is one word, my friends: fear. This is based on a research which was conducted upon 15 long-form interviews which ranged from 10 to 15 hours each and thus took place over 4 to 7 sessions. The interviews were conducted through a plethora of questions and topics, as well as follow-up questions aimed at dissecting the answers given further. The kinds of questions which were asked included: what do you think of the phrase, "all men are created equal"? As well as, how do you feel if everyone earned the same income, no matter the job? Followed by, what class do you think you belong to? These findings were very interesting. The interviewees believed that the rich deserved their status, as do the poor. Statements alluding to the notion that, if the poor truly wanted to, they can rise up the rankings were made in these same interviews. But most strikingly of all, people displayed a fear of equal opportunities truly being provided for all. They believe that if we lived in a world of proper, full equal opportunities, then they might be usurped by the people below them. Among the other key implications of this research were that people believe that the greater the emphasis a society places upon the availability of equal opportunity for all, the greater the need for members of that society to develop an acceptable rationalization for their own social status. Furthermore, it is believed that lower status people generally find it less punishing to think of themselves as correctly placed by a just society than to think of themselves as exploited unjustly by society. Interestingly, advertisements have been found to promote this advocacy for inequality. The promotion of consumerism breeds rivalry and discontent between people of similar classes, and not among those from other classes. So in conclusion, today we discussed the bodies of research that showcased humanity's innate desire for not necessarily equality, but in fact, fairness, equity. Through further researches, humanity's acceptance and even advocacy for inequality was also highlighted, with interesting psychological undertones expressed in the final research we covered. So having said all that, what do you think of all these findings? Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content.